You go into the Pacific, they're really proud people. You know, we are intense in how we address some of these problems. But we talk amongst ourselves and we think like, surely they see this. When I come here in London and I'm seeing, no, it's barely recognized, right?
This is Climate Curious, the podcast for people who are bored, scared, or confused by climate change.
I'm Maryam, Pasha, the director and curator at TEDxLondon and the co-host of this podcast, alongside the amazing Ben.
Hi, I'm Ben Hurst, activist and advocate exploring what positive masculinities can look like, and self-confessed climate normie.
Hey, Ben.
Hey.
It's so good to be doing this with you again.
I know, I love it so much.
Welcome back to all of our listeners. We talk a lot about storytelling on this podcast, right, and we talk a lot about communications. And if you'd listened in previous seasons, you would have seen us talking to people like Catherine Hayhoe and Krista Mayer about how we talk about climate change. And I'm so excited that we have finally gotten to this episode.
It's going to be a good one, right?
Yeah, and I actually feel like I just kind of want to get into it before giving a really long intro. So I'm going to welcome our incredible guest, Josephine Latu-Sanft, and ask you, Josephine, a question that I don't know if we can ask. Ben and I ask this question quite a lot.
It's a controversial one.
Welcome, and can you tell us where you're from?
Where I'm from? Well, thank you. Thanks for the welcome. And where I'm from, I mean, for me, it's not a controversial question because I'm actually really proud of where I'm from. I'm from the Kingdom of Tonga, which is in the South Pacific. It's an island group of about 170 little tiny atolls, little tiny islands, and with a population of about 100,000 people, right? So quite small relative to the UK. And I've lived in the UK for a few years now, and I've worked internationally for more than a decade.
Wow.
In international public sector. You know, throughout my career and how I am now, I've always been rooted in my Tonganness, in my Pacific Islandness, and my identity is really important. And of course, one of the main issues that we face in the Pacific is climate change and the impacts of climate change.
Right.
So Great to be here and talk about that.
And just, I want to ask you one other question is before we really get into it, because I have questions about Tonga and your work, is you're not here speaking in any kind of official capacity, right?
No, I'm not. I mean, I work as a communication specialist in the intergovernmental sector, but today I'm here as a Tongan, a Tongan Fijian. You know, I'm also, my mom's family is from Fiji. I'm here as a Pacific Islander. I'm here as somebody who's affected by climate change and committed to knowing more about it, and excited to talk about it. And for me personally, as a Pacific Islander, I see a lot of the time myself, my country, my people portrayed, in these grand narratives. And you know, it's just interesting to see. Sometimes it makes me, I actually don't identify with the stories that are out there about who we are. And I think it's important that we make sure that all voices are heard, that different stories are being told, so that we really get our heads around this phenomenon that's happening to us as human beings, that's happening to the world, you know?
And it's so important, right? Like, I think that this is like, actually really refreshing to have you here, like not in an official capacity, because I think it gives this message which is so important for people to hear, that like this is not a conversation that is reserved for professionals.
Exactly.
This is not a conversation that's like only for the people in, I was going to say in ivory towers. That's so like such like weird language, but it's not for a special group of people who have a certain qualification. This is for anybody who's impacted by it. And I think we're at the point now where everybody's impacted by it. So it's for all of us to be having, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then in my line of work, especially, you know, I deal a lot, I go to the COP meetings, the annual UN climate change summits, and then I deal a lot with communicating these issues to a worldwide audience. But at the same time, you know, you have these two identities intersect. A lot of the times, you know, it's funny, the messages that I find myself, you know, churning out and sharing, and which are facts, right? Which are reality. The fact that island states such as Tonga are vulnerable. They are very prone to climate disasters. They are small. They're remote. They're weak. They're super susceptible to all these negative effects of climate change, sea level rise, increased intense in storms, cyclones, etc. And you trying to make people care about the issue, that people are affected. But then at the same time, when I go home and then I tell these same messages to myself in the mirror, or think about telling my own family members or my own people and saying, you know what, you guys, we are actually small and we are weak and we're defenseless and we need hand holding. And I feel like there should be something more positive for me to hang on to personally, because, tellings, I always sometimes make the comparison with, going to a friend who's, really ill or terminally ill, or somebody who's on death row or something, and telling them, you know what, you're going to die. You know that you're going to die, right?
Super helpful.
It's it's such a bad situation.
Yeah.
You're going to die, and then we're all, and you wouldn't do that, because you're just going to put the person in a position that makes them think, you know what, I'm actually quite helpless. I'm a victim, and I really have to, I can't help myself.
Yeah.
And that is such at odds with how I grew up. Like I said, I was born and raised in Tonga. I was very proud of our culture, of our people, of how we dealt with problems. And I always thought that we were strong and resilient. And I literally thought we were like the best thing since sliced bread. Tongans are just great.
You are.
Right? Yeah. And then this carried me through my youth, my university, and allowed me through my career. And then I find myself seeing these. If you Google small island developing states, right, which is the international category that we fall into, you will see almost the same description in any international, public sector text, right? It's like small island states, or SIDS, are vulnerable. They're small. They're remote. They don't have large economies. They are highly indebted. They're extremely disaster prone. They are extremely vulnerable to climate disasters. They might be the next climate refugees. They are sinking. They're disappearing. They're about to be wiped out.
Yeah,
and that's intense.
That's
everywhere.
A rough message to hear about yourself, man.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah, all the time. And this is the dominant, by far message about
and I have to say,
states.
I did, Josephine, that's what I did. I went, when you were interviewing you, and I Googled Tonga, and I opened, and I wanted official,
Right. I need the facts, the data, please.
So I went to the UN and legitimate, more mainstream sources, and exactly what you're saying was the only thing. The first thing was the World Risk Report in 2017 ranked Tonga the second most at-risk country in the world for natural hazards, including cyclones, flooding, as well as sea level rise.
Is that actually true?
It is. It is.
That, I guess that's the. We want to get into this, but one of the questions I have is how do you balance the reality with a sense of agency?
Yes, exactly. And these things are real, right? So the Pacific Islands are susceptible to a higher level of sea rise than the global average. So say in about 30 years, by the time my son, who's 9, by the time he's my age, the sea would have risen about a foot or something, and then by 2100 there's a meter. Translating that to the coastal erosion, that would be far inland, right? The World Bank has made has done analysis and projections in Nuku'alofa, and we're talking about 25% or a quarter of the capital destroyed, the power structures, 11% of the roads with, by 2100. So these are real situations that I have to factor into my own decision making now, right? We have a family home. I have to think about, should I sell it? Should I move inland? Should I try to build a house that's better structured? Should I leave it to my son? The same way that people here think about my children's university and their careers, that's, I have to factor in climate change in those types of situations.
And this is why the conversation is important, right? Because I think what you're speaking to is something that is a reality for so many people around the world. Like when you're talking, in my mind, I'm hearing the conversation that I had as a kid with my parents about race and like the idea of like whether you'll have to work harder or like all of the things that you have to consider that other people don't have to consider. And I can only go into myself to try and find points to relate. And the thing that is standing out to me is like like on an emotional level, how do you deal with this? Because it sounds like the whole narrative that you're getting the whole time is just purely negative. And I know you said that you grew up really proud of who you were and where you came from and who your people are. So how does that translate into like your work?
I mean, I remember when I started as a journalist, there wasn't a Tongan word in the vernacular for climate change.
Yeah.
Right now there is. When you see how sometimes the impacts of climate change on Pacific Islands is portrayed, one would think, if you didn't know anything else about us, you would think that the sea is about to is flowing in every village and people are like desperate right now and they're like you need to save them, you need to send ships in or something like that, right? If you didn't no idea, but it's more complex than that. And that's the thing with narratives. When media try to talk about these issues, because they're so complex and they have to reach so many people, and we're still driven by news values that include how big is the impact, how many people died, which countries, who is involved, are there important people or not? If not, is it new? Is it exciting? Is it surprising? These are the news values that still run. So people have to kind of, squash these huge complex issues into something,
whole reality into that little box.
Into like that 2-minute news story, into the. But that's what people want. But with climate change, this is long-term changes. We're trying to reorient how human civilization approaches how we live,
right.
Our values. And that's a long-term thing, right? You cannot base those decisions on just those type of quick reactions.
One question I wanted to ask is about the long-term damage these kinds of narratives do. Because I think that's something you've mentioned before, and I'd love to get your point of view on, like, if this is how kind of nations like Tonga are portrayed, what is the danger of the long-term damage in terms of the way we think about it as a global community? Yeah.
So and when we're talking about the long-term impact of some of these narratives and how we frame some of these facts, I keep thinking, there's this scholar, Pacific Island thinker called Epeli Hauofa. He's Tongan, but he's lived around the region, and he came up with the idea that we're not islands in the sea, but a sea of islands, right? So we're not these little spots dotted around, just far flung and isolated. When you think about us, it's a sea where our ocean that we're so connected to culturally links us together. We're actually a force, and we need to change that type of thinking in our minds at Pacific Islands to think about us as powerful. It's like we have a role to play. And in the beginning of one of his books, he explained that he had also worked in the developing sector for a long time, and sometimes he found himself depressed because he'd come and tell his students the same experience, literally the same experience that I have, about how Pacific Island countries at that time, it was MIRAB. There was an acronym describing our countries, which is like, a small income, dependent on remittances, blah, 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 right? It's again one of those descriptions
basically
of
disrespectful.
of the economics, the sad economic situation of these islands. And then he had to teach these to his students in university. And he said just watching their faces fall when they realize to themselves just, what a bad situation, their future is just, dissipating in front of their eyes. And then that I had that kind of similar experience when I thought about, hey, all this stuff that I'm writing, what does that say to me? What does it say to my children? What does that say to my families and friends? That to constantly say that your position, your value, your role in the world, as far as international relations and international development, is that you're hopeless, almost, just about, and you're in such a bad situation, and hey, let's see how we can all help you. Let's see how we can give you aid and climate finance and whatever to cope with your situation. And then it makes me think about how for such a long time, the continent of Africa was portrayed in certain ways, poor, corrupt, overpopulated, whatever, for decades before finally people started acknowledging that this is a hub of, massive hub of innovation, of bursting population, of potential, of power, right? But for the longest time, you would ask somebody in other parts of the world what they would think about this part, and then the immediate image would be, starving children, etc. Right. And what I fear, and then it's not exactly the situation, but what I would not want is that the dominant image and the dominant, identity of Pacific Islands in the international arena is to be the victims of climate change, the victims of climate change that we need to go and pity and help, right? We have to recognize that, one, we're all in this together, one, and also, two, people have agency. They are coming up with solutions. They have a lot to offer, and they're proud of it. You go into the Pacific, they're really proud people. We are intense in how we address some of these problems. But we talk amongst ourselves, and we think like, surely they see this. When I come here in London, and I'm seeing, no, it's barely recognized, right? Yeah. And then sometimes I'm thinking, look. They've
already figured out the solution to that problem.
Yes, but no, nobody's hearing it. You have to do more to penetrate the global mainstream media. You have to do more. You have to use social media to bring that voice out, because it's not being heard out here. It's barely. Sometimes you will have huge ocean conferences or conferences on climate, and you'll have no Pacific Islanders. Maybe one person from a small island states in another region, for example, or a little smattering, and then the rest is, solutions bringers from this part of the world. And, there's a disconnect here. The thing is, there's so many voices you could give. There's so many solutions you could highlight that's coming out from developing countries. However, the other things that are happening in this country, the resilience of the people, the innovations that people come up with, the advocacy that they're taking, that on their own to fight this on a global level, doesn't get nearly as much attention, right? Yeah. And we're talking about these Pacific Island countries and a lot of other small island developing states as well. They definitely punch above their weight all the time in international fora. There was a huge volcanic eruption that happened in Tonga, which resulted in a huge tsunami, and it really destroyed large parts of the country. And because I was Tongan, I had people requesting interviews to see what was my reaction. Right. And I could tell when in these interviews that there was already a set narrative. And I could tell because I am a journalist. I could tell that this is the most convenient story, which is talk about the destruction and what happened. And after that, when did the planes come in from overseas? When did people come and save you?
When did they come to save you? Yeah.
When did people come save you? And then we'll end with that. That was basically it, right? In several TV interviews. Right. And I was trying to say, look, before the planes could come in, we were cut off from all communications. So for several days, local people were mobilizing themselves. Churches were giving out food. People were opening their doors to each other. Businesses were laying, their goods and services available for people to survive. I mean, the networks really had to kick in gear and maintain the population. But, those in other words, they were heroes.
Yeah.
But when you tell the story and, the immediate one that comes to mind was like, okay, you guys were destroyed. When did our heroes come and save you? And I don't mean that to be ungrateful. No, not at all. I mean, absolutely, Tonga needed as much overseas assistance as they could get. But we have to give credit where it is due. People in our countries are having the agencies to adapt to climate change and to make bold calls, and nobody else is asking for, right? And pushing the envelope. And we should be supporting them in that.
I mean, I love everything you've just said, and I have so many questions. One thing that comes to mind for me is, one of the dominant narratives is that there isn't enough ambition from our political leaders. Like, we need our leaders to lead. And actually, what I'm hearing from you is that there's a whole series of leaders who are leading, but we just don't pay any attention to them.
They're just not politicians.
They're not G5, they're not G8, they're not G20.
Yeah.
So it's like what we have actually is incredible leadership from people who know and have been dealing with the reality of this for much longer. It's so, for me, obvious that we have this mentality in the West that we're only interested in helping if we can be a savior. Does all this great stuff for these needy, desperate people. We can't ever think of, okay, yes, we have a role to play because actually we caused this problem.
Yeah.
And we benefited from it financially, so we have the resources to help. But we can't ever see it as an equal partnership, like as a yes, we have a responsibility, but we don't have to be the ones leading. I feel like it is really a shift in the way we think about how we interact with, and it's not just climate, right? It's on lots of different levels, like you were saying, development in parts of the world, etc. We need a shift in our way of thinking. But I think, although some other sectors like development have started to go through this analysis, I don't think that maybe climate has gone through it, because for the longest time, we've talked about this on the podcast before, the only people you heard talking about climate were one type of person from one or two countries in the world. They were normally white, educated,
right,
wealthy-ish compared to others from the US and the UK and like a few other, like in the Netherlands, and and that was it, and that was the only perspectives you heard of. And so of course there hasn't been that reformation, that moment, I think, in the climate movement, although I think it's happening, to think actually maybe we should be listening to other voices. Maybe there are solutions out there. We've talked about it before in the podcast, the idea of like indigenous solutions to climate change and how they're there, but we go around thinking like, oh, what are we going to do to save the rainforest? What could we possibly do to save the rainforest?
Yeah.
If only someone somewhere in the world had solutions.
Knew about
if only
it and
people
lived
were making
there.
carbon sinks right now,
And then
we could figure out how to
everyone who
replicate
lives in the
those things.
rainforest knows how to save the rainforest. Why don't you just ask them?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's a interesting thing. Sometimes I think about it as like if you jointly share an apartment with people, or you jointly own a car or something, and because of your income level, you only gave in like 10% or whatever. But then your partner goes out and does something and crashes the car or trashes the apartment, and then you come back and you say, but we shared this is ours.
I'm not paying half of this. Yeah, this is unfair.
You did this, right? It's that simple. So it's actually a no-brainer. But because there's a vested interest, there's how the global economy is set up, and like I said, this is a long-term thing of reorienting everything, how we think in general, how we think about everything. And being better, and taking that brave step of like being better people, taking the more sustainable route, taking the more cooperative route, the collaborative route, and it's a long journey. So there is a shift. It's just not fast enough, right? It should be faster, and the consequences of not being fast enough and not being taking the sustainable route fast enough. It's not like a comet will suddenly come and boom, we're all destroyed at one time. No, it's going to be a gradual. Say we don't do anything, we continue in our ways, and because of the impact, say, only 2% of the population have to die some way, whether it's from heat waves or whatever. 2% is only still 140 million people. Who's going to go first? Who gets to have it's an ethical question.
Yeah.
Right. And
this is the thing. Every time we hear someone, I have to say this. Every time I hear someone say, "Oh, but 1.5 degrees is just, it's too ambitious. We should just talk about like being under 2 degrees or whatever." I just think like, what you're saying is there's an acceptable level of death.
Yeah.
Like you're saying that it's acceptable to you for these people that are not you and will not ever be you and will never be the people that you care about to die. 1.5 degrees is we've already all decided that that's going to be fine. But the idea that you could like allow like, I don't know. I just think that we never talk plainly. We talk like, 1.5 degrees, or even the latest narrative of every 10th of a degree makes a difference. Like, what if we said for every 10th of a degree, you are allowing millions of people to die? What if we said that instead? Just so that we could really understand, like, that we are making a decision that some people's lives are just not as important.
Yes, exactly. And then you can see, like here in the UK, when your comfort level is even a little bit impinged upon, there's an uproar,
when there's a heat wave, we're like, this is unacceptable.
Exactly.
I need to shower today. Yes, it's rough. Yeah,
but exactly. I mean, even in real terms, like we're going through right now, in terms of the cost of living crisis. Right.
Yeah.
The cost of living crisis, which is real, right? It's affecting me, and I hate it. But think about other people who have to pay a lot more for that. In terms of your comfort level, your lifestyle as it is, right? You're going to lose that due to climate if we don't do something about climate change. I mean, I'm thinking about in Tonga. I remember I was working in an office in the Central Business District area at one point, and it was the second biggest telecommunications company in the country. Still, when it rained really heavily or there was a storm, the water would sweep into the office, the reception area, and flood it, and then we'll all have a day off and sweep out the water, and then when it dried up, I don't think people can take that, and because you face it for so long, there were several schools. Every time when it rained too hard, those kids will not go to school because it was just flooded. And that was just a fact of life, right? And then this is what I'm talking about, even awareness at our level. We have to be aware that this is actually, we can stop that and we can address it. But my friends, heavy rains, floods, we stay muddy and yucky for a few days, but after that you clear it out, and that's just like part of life. You wouldn't be able, I don't think average people here would want to live like that. You know what I mean? So but yet they're fine with other people living like that.
I think that's what the cost of living crisis has actually done, because there are going to be people in this country who really suffer, and I think what it has brought to the surface is that we're actually okay with even those people suffering. Yeah. Like when it comes down to it, our circle not us, I'm not saying the people in this room or even people listening, I mean decision makers, the people who could actually, in the time necessary, make the decisions that could make a difference here in this country. They're actually the circle I think what they've made so evident is that the circle they care about is very small. And everyone outside that circle, whether they be people who are going to live in fuel poverty here, whether they're people who've been living in fuel poverty or other kinds of poverty for decades, but it's acceptable losses. It's just acceptable losses. And I think that is the thing that might hopefully start making us see that we're not so different. Like what someone in like Tonga, which in some ways, I always wonder, Josephine, like for you, is London so different from Tonga? Like, I would imagine that they're like worlds apart, in terms of like just in terms of the like scenery that you see outside your window and all of that, but actually we are experiencing the same things.
Yes, no, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we're a small world, but we're a big one, right? And definitely there's, I mean, I remember coming here, I was like, just like, oh my gosh, the Big Ben. These are things I only saw in postcards, like me and my family. And then when one time we took a trip to Paris, I almost fainted. The Eiffel Tower, right? These are things you just see on the TV, you know what I'm saying? Like literally. But at the same time, you see people here struggling, right? Same as we all struggled, right? Everybody's on the grind and everything. And I think when you think about something like climate change and the different perspectives about it and how different nations experience it differently, sometimes, and you think about, thinking about this globally is just too much, it's just too separated from me. Actually, when you think about it globally, you're thinking about it as a human thing, as a human being. You're actually bringing it back to the individual and thinking about it as a human being who's going to see all of these impacts wherever you are in the world. So it's important to realize, and it's important for people who are curious, people listening to this podcast. That's already a good thing, right? Learn more about it because it's happening. It's a reality. You might as well know what's how people are making decisions, what's affecting you.
My last question actually is there, if people listening, there's some things like we can and can't do, but in terms of helping break these narratives, what do you feel people can do to help break those narratives if they're not journalists or the owner of a news corporation?
Yeah, I mean, one of the basic things I think people can do that helps is just educating yourself, like making an effort to know more about the topic, right? You see things on your news feed, read the climate story. Don't just flip it over. Like, take the time to read about it. Take the time to listen to podcasts such as this.
One thing I'm going to do, having listened to you, and I think it's just something that we can all do on lots of different issues, especially to climate change, is when I read an article about, let's say, like a small island nation, or maybe Madagascar, or somewhere that maybe is experiencing climate change, I'm going to make sure that there is a voice in that article that is from that place. Yeah. That it's not just written as if it was like just an outsider perspective. I think that is something that I feel like I can do to feel less like I'm contributing to the narrative of victimhood and savior.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can also, when you watch the news or when you read information, be a little bit more critical about it. Critically think about it. Who's talking here? Who's benefit from this story? Who are the heroes here and the villains and the minor characters whose only role is to glorify the hero or the villain, and whose voices are being told here, and seek out diversity of voices.
I'm so sorry. I've been really quiet this episode, and I think I feel like once every season there's an episode like this where I just kind of sit here and I'm like, oh my gosh. But I do think if there's anybody who's like me, people who are listening, who probably have heard this and listened all the way through, and are maybe feeling like a little bit overwhelmed, but I don't know if that's a bad feeling. I think that there is something that we have to kind of grapple with, which is the reality of the situation that we, in our complicity, we allow to happen. And I'm going to really reflect on it. I think this is one of those ones that's like really hit me hard. So thank you so much. Because I think it's like such an important conversation. And I think even this conversation, so often we're in rooms where we're like hypothesizing and theorizing and talking about the importance of having, like, letting people have their voice and like platforming people and all of that kind of stuff. But I think when it actually happens is when you feel the reality of like why this is important and why it's urgent. And I really appreciate you spending your time with us and sharing with us so openly and so honestly. I think it's so important.
And I think that's and you've touched on something important about people feeling overwhelmed and just by the magnitude of what's happening and whether they can or can't do anything about it. And hey, you know what? We're all in the same boat, okay? I mean, I feel overwhelmed sometimes, but we shouldn't be deers in the headlights, right? And we have to mobilize strong about it, and we should keep fighting about it. We should keep pushing for it because it's possible.
And now it's time for our climate confessions. Let's fess up to the bad habits we just can't kick.
I mean, I've got a few as well. I mean, this is a great activity because, again, when if we start thinking that climate activists are so perfect, we have no hope because we're all human beings. I mean, one is like our car. It is diesel, and we're delaying trying to replace it because just getting the hybrid just costs so much, right? And this is a real struggle. And then I think they're going to now move the ultra low emission zone further, and we might have to at some point. But we moved at one point from this emission zone keeps creeping up, and then we keep moving. We're like, yes, we're out of it, but it keeps catching up. Yeah. So that's one. But also I think one that I'm more embarrassed about is that, how they say that one of the most important things or the most impactful things that you can do to address climate change is talk to your local MP, talk to the politician in your council or something like that. I have no idea how to do that. I've never done it. I don't know even where to start, even though I've been working all this time. I haven't, made this, if somebody can put out a tweet thread or TikTok of how to do this, who to email, what do you say, what points do you raise, how do you do it, how is this email supposed to help, why is this the most impactful way, is it going to make a drop, and just put that in like a few sentences. I think it'll help a lot of us because seriously, I've heard that so many people have said the most important thing you can do is talk to your local MP. I have no idea how that works.
Thank you for taking the time and talk to us.
You're welcome.
It's given us a lot to think about.
Oh, so much to think about, honestly.
Yeah, and it's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed the conversation and welcome it. I wish I could have these conversations all the time, with people.
Oh, and remember, stay curious. Thank you for joining us this week. We really hope you enjoyed this episode.
If you did, please hit the follow button to make sure you get next week's release.
We are now officially crowdsourcing Climate Confession, so please leave yours in the ratings and the reviews section, and we'll shout out a few next time. And shout out to our fabulous team behind the pod.
This episode was produced by Josie Colter.
Comms written by Tess Lowry.
Artwork designed by Rebecca Mingus.
Curation by Maryam Pasha.
Mixed and engineered by Ben Beheshty.
Music also by Ben Beheshty.
Presented by Ben Hurst
and Maryam Pasha. Remember, stay curious.